On this episode of Team Building Saves the World.
You know what? If you connect with people on a human level where they are and explain some of this, it really does work.
Yeah.
How do I know how to make my team bond more effectively? Is I really kind of need to ask them.
Yeah.
My sessions are very high energy. They're very interactive.
And From you, I can't imagine that, Mel.
Hey, we're going to have this class today because you lost this lawsuit. Yay! Can't wait. Let's talk about it.
Hello, team. It's me, your old friend Rich Rininsland, host of Team Building Saves the World, the show where I speak to thought leaders from around the world, discussing variable strategies and tools to help you and your team build a better work environment. And today, we're discussing a very important topic in today's world, DEI&B, or Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, with my guest, facilitator, consultant, and the founder of the Melanie Miller and Associates LLC, Melanie Miller. But first, I have to share some love with my supporters at Team Bonding. If your team is ready to experience teamwork through the power of play, then visit teambonding.com to learn more. Now, team, please join me in welcoming my guest, a woman with over 27 years of experience in management training and consulting with a focus in DEI&B, Melanie Miller. Melanie! Welcome, my friend. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic. I love your team.
Oh, thank you. And from all of them.
They're always so energetic. I love that.
They really are. You'd never know that I keep them trapped under my desk just to applaud you. Well, Melanie, let's start out like I do with everybody. If we can, please just explain to my team out there a little bit about yourself, who you are, how you got into the facilitation and management training, and why a focus in DEI.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rich, for having me. Thanks to everyone. So I come out of corporate America. I used to work in a marketing advertising capacity years ago. I usually just say 20-ish years, mostly because I don't like the last number. Gotcha. It hurts my stomach. So that's where I landed. I was working for an ad agency, and one of the two partners stuck his head in my office one Friday and said, "Hey, when you go home today, take home all your personal items because there's going to be a padlock on the door on Monday." Ooh. And then he left, and I thought, what does that even mean? So long story short, they filed bankruptcy. I found out a little bit later they were bankrupt because we were billing our clients. They were paying, and the two owners were taking the money that they paid with. So that was kind of a bummer. And I sat home watching The Young and the Restless and eating a lot of chips and dip because I could not get my head around, like, who does that? Who purposefully, intentionally does that to their employees and their families? So a buddy of mine called one day and said, "Do you have a job?" And I said, "No, but I need one. I can't do this indefinitely." And that is how I got into, at the time, it was just called Diversity. Okay. He said, "A friend of mine has a diversity consulting company. You should call them." And I said, "That's great. I don't know anything about consulting. And the whole idea of stocks and bonds, diversification of numbers, I'm really bad with numbers." And he said, "It ain't that kind of diversity. Call him." So I did. And here I am 20-ish years later.
Beautiful. So talking about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, I've talked about it many times with many different guests. I don't think a season has gone by in the 5 years I've been doing this now where we didn't have something to talk about in DEI. But now we have DEI&B. First off, let's just, if we can, let's give a short little explanation as to what it all means to my team out there who might have just been joining the podcast. And where did the belonging come from? Where did the need for that addition come from?
Yes, I am. I'm laughing because so few people ask anymore what it actually means. They'll see an acronym and they kind of think that's a word.
Right.
It's not a word, right? It's an acronym, and it does, as you said, the D stands for diversity, E, equity, I, inclusion, B, belonging. And so the way I like to just sort of quickly and simply state it is diversity is just all the differences and similarities people show up with. It's all the differences that you have in your workforce. It's all the differences that you have in the community that you serve. It's the differences in your marketplace, and it's the differences that are on your team. I also include similarity in there because we believe the similarities make the differences matter. Nice. I'm going to jump to inclusion, right? So if diversity, I kind of see diversity as a noun, right? It's just all the stuff you come in with. Inclusion is the verb, it's what you do with it. So inclusion is the environment you create by what you say and what you do. Either you create an environment where somebody feels like they're included or not. And if I feel really included and valued and respected, I'm going to feel like I belong in your organization. And so while that was I'll say that was maybe a tangential connection to inclusion for years, but we're really just kind of calling it out now. If I say I feel like I belong, and we're not talking about that from the perspective of like, I own you, you belong, here.
Right.
I say it from the perspective of, I feel like I can just show up and be my authentic self, not my full self. Some people say be my full self, and there's some stuff that you just don't need to bring to the workplace, right? You've got to follow the law. You got to follow company policy, compliance, regulation, those kinds of things.
Right.
You still got to do that. So, belonging is just the result of having an inclusive culture. And then equity, I like to say, is just having a mindset that one size doesn't fit all. The quick story I connect and share with that is that it's as if the CEO of your organization says, hey, next Monday, I want you to show up and I want everybody to wear a size 10 men's sneaker. Well, that's great if you wear a size 10 men's sneaker. That's equality. Everybody's wearing the same shoe. Equity says, hey, if the requirement is I have to wear a sneaker, fine, but give me one that fits my foot, right? So that's equity. It's just giving everybody access to resource tools, FaceTime with senior leaders, ways to be successful on the team, those kinds of things. And just as a leader, figuring out where those differences might be.
So speaking of which, coming up in the 80s, as I was, to talk about numbers we don't like talking about anymore, but that's when I first started getting into the world of selling myself to a marketplace, to actually get that money that we all need and desire and crave. But this was hardly even mentioned, let alone something that was a focus. What are some of the misconceptions that have come around since then that people who recommend DEI&B have had to face?
Great question. If you think about sort of the evolution or the progression of how diversity sort of, shows up.
Yeah.
If you think back, I'm going to take us back to the 60s and 70s, where it really kind of had a compliance focus. So the government came on and said, hey, we've got this thing called equal opportunity.
Yep.
And so what that meant was we're hiring more people of color, more women into the workplace. And so what happened is a lot of people, and especially white males at the time, didn't feel connected to this work. It was like, it's about everybody but me. I'm supposed to be compliant. I'll go to my session. I'll check the box. And I'm supposed to learn how to can't we all get along with everybody? And so that was sort of the start of this. And then as we moved into the 80s and the 90s, it kind of took a turn. People started looking at diversity from the lens of, this is really a competitive advantage. If I can figure this out, I'll have a competitive advantage over the other people that are in my same space, competitors.
Whatever that other is, right?
That thing. Right. Those other things, my competitors. So I'll have a competitive advantage. But then it quickly changed to the whole idea of a business imperative. Like, if I want to be a business that's not just surviving, but thriving, I better figure this out. What does this even mean? So it's kind of changed over the years. We saw a big change after the murder of George Floyd. A lot of organizations coming on saying, hey, like, I really want to do something specific to the space of race. Yeah. Remember, I said diversity is all those differences. So it includes race. That's certainly a piece of the pie, but it's also people with disabilities, veterans, people who are neurodiverse, different religions. It's whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. All of that is diversity. But as we move from 2022-ish to 2024, it's taken a turn again. It's got a lot of negative connotation associated with it. I had a session recently. I was doing it on Zoom, in fact, and the first guy that came on, the camera came on, and he had his arms crossed and he had a sour look on his face. And I was joking with him. I said, hey, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome. You get a gold star. You're the first person on the session. And he just sat there with a sour face. And he said, well, I'm here to get woke, so go ahead and make me woke.
Oh, that word.
I said, get woke. I said, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And I smiled and he said, and I said, do you know what woke means? He just shrugged and I got right in my camera and right in my microphone. And I said, come here. I said, all it means is that you realize that people that don't look like you have had a completely different lived experience on this planet than
Right.
you.
Right.
And he looked and he unfolded his arms and he goes, oh, that's it. I said, yeah, now you got to stay in the session with me. You can't leave. But now I'm going to make you my co-trainer. And I have to tell you, he was wonderful for the next 2 hours. He was fantastic. He did a great job and was so engaged. But that again proves to me that, you know, if you connect with people on a human level where they are and you know, explain some of this, it really does work.
Yeah. Having talked about this with gifted people like yourselves over the years, every time this topic comes up on my playlist of things we're going to be talking about, I almost feel ashamed because I am the age that I am and the color that I am. And it always makes me feel like I should not be the one who is talking about this. But yes, everybody is different. Everybody comes from a different background. Everybody has a different experience to be shared. And that's what makes the melting pot that we're supposed to be the best possible solution.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We want you talking about this, Rich. We need you in this space, especially the age you are and the color you are.
Yeah.
You know, when we think about DEI champions as a whole, oftentimes I'm immediately drawn to a project I was working on. I was asked to work with a senior leadership team of a financial wealth organization. And I was asked, they come on, they said, hey, so here's the thing we need you to help us with. Help our white male senior leaders become better advocates for DE&I. And I said, okay. I said, so let's think about it. So I thought, I'm going to ask some of my white male colleagues why they're not better advocates of DE&I.
Right.
And of the people I asked, 92% of the white males that responded said something to the effect of, why are you asking me? Aren't I the enemy?
Yes.
And yeah.
Yes. And to be fair, that's not an incorrect assumption.
Yeah, absolutely. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
I learned a lot from them and their perspective. And me saying, no, like white men have been included from the very beginning. We need you on this train, if you will. It's a broad definition of diversity. It's a broad, when we look at how leaders effectively engage their team, we have a ton of white male leaders and we need you in there talking about this to make you more effective. So yeah, we need everybody on board. Keep talking about it, Rich.
I will. Thank you. Oh, mostly because they pay me to. But no. This is a wonderful topic, and it is truly, truly important. In fact, to use your own word, imperative, especially today, where angry seems to be the way to respond to everything. Just to share a story of my own, being a performer that I am, during the pandemic and closer to the end of it, I was getting on with a bunch of meetings with the fellow actors of mine, and we're talking about when we come back, what's it going to look like? How are we going to keep each other not only safe, but still working, so on and so forth. Somebody completely tongue-in-cheek asked the question, because this was the time of George Floyd. This was the time of the police going on trial. This was all included. And somebody asked, when will we know that the race riots have started? Just as because I said, does anybody have any questions? And that was the question they came up with.
Wow.
And the answer I gave them, again, trying to be tongue-in-cheek, but all sincere, was when people like me are no longer responding to calls because we're not there anymore. And I think that is what a lot of the fear is that people are facing. Because we hear nowadays, and I don't want to make this a political podcast. It's not, that's not what this is. But business and politics are often hand in hand. They're often cohorts. So we are hearing those people like myself who are afraid of replacement theory, even though that's ridiculous to think about. There's so many flaws in that plan, I can't talk about it. But is this part of the reason why you think that getting DEI in more and more offices and in more conversations is imperative, to use your own word?
I think the imperative connection comes from asking an organization, how successful do you want to be?
Okay.
Right. I think back to the old, I want to say old, maybe that's a trigger word for both of us. an older than example, the Chevy Nova story. I don't know if you ever heard that,
No,
where
please.
GM builds the Chevy Nova here in the States. They called it the Nova after the shining star. It sold beautifully here. I believe it was in the 80s. And then they shipped it down to Latin America. It didn't sell well. And of course, they put a committee together to figure out why. And they found out that the word Nova, where when they initially started with that was the shining star. But if you're speaking Spanish, Nova means no go, and they were calling this car the no go car. It's like, what? So then people said, well, if we had people who were Hispanic on the team or Latino on the team, maybe we wouldn't have had this. Doesn't mean I necessarily need to have somebody who's Latino or Hispanic on the team. I need to have somebody on the team that speaks Spanish. And that could be somebody that went on a church mission trip to Mexico.
Okay.
And they took a high school Spanish class. They would know Nova means no go.
Right.
The interesting part of that story to me was, and it was shared with me that the place where the plant where the car was manufactured had big banners in the plant that said English only spoken here. And the intention was they had a lot of English as a second language speakers in the plant.
Yeah.
The intention was around safety, of course. We have to have baseline understanding, right? We're building a car. We've got to do it safely. Okay. But what I understand is that some employees would go to their leaders and say, hey, Nova in my language. And the response back from management was, hey, can't you people read? And they point to the banners. So if we're looking at, I want to build an organization that is going to move me into the future, well, what does that entail, right? And one thing is I've got to have employees and individual contributors and leaders who are helping me get there. And if I have leaders who are shutting down some of my folks, that's not going to work too well.
So let's dig in. When managers come to you, what is it they're coming to you for? What do they think they need? And what is it that they want to get from you?
I will tell you that I have managers come to me for one of three reasons. One is, I got in trouble. Can you come help me fix it?
Okay.
One.
Okay.
The second thing is, maybe I listened to a podcast, or I went to an event and I heard this diversity thing should be good and help my business. What do I need to know? Come talk to me. Or come help my leaders be better leaders. And the majority of the work I do is with leadership. And so whether it's delivering a training or a keynote at an event for them, I come in and they'll tell me, oftentimes I feel like it equates to, you're a physician and somebody says, hey, just give me some medicine. You're a doctor. You can write me a prescription. Well, wait a minute. You're sick with what? Well, I don't know. I just can't write this.
Right.
People will say to me, just come talk about some diversity inclusion stuff. Well, what's going on? Like, what is your mission as an organization? Because again, everything I do is tied back to a company's vision, their mission, and their values. And everything in the DEI realm should connect to that. It should be helping the organization move the needle in those areas. And so usually that's where they're coming from.
Okay. Melanie, we want to go from there. I'm going to get back to this, but I hope you don't mind. I do need to step away for a brief second, because I got to talk to my team out there about a company I am very proud to be a part of, Team Bonding. Team Bonding was founded over 20 years ago with one simple question: how can employees have a great time while fostering strong, authentic bonds between people who work together? No matter where your company is located, Team Bonding offers powerful, engaging, custom team building events designed to get the best out of your team anywhere in the world. They've created a catalog of innovative events using the power of play as a learning tool and tapping into the correlation of work and play. So whether it's scavenger hunts to Jeopardy or so much more, the team bonding of activities, whether it's live, virtual, or hybrid, maximizes the impact of team building with an accent on fun. So visit teambonding.com to schedule your event now. Team Bonding, when you want seriously fun results. And we are back talking to a seriously fun individual about a rather serious topic. We're discussing DEI&B with Melanie Miller. Melanie, you said as you went in, a lot of people might come to you and say, I made a mistake. There was a big corporate level oopsie, and I need you to help me fix it. Can you give me an example without naming names or without naming corporations? Because I know you've worked with Fortune 500 companies, you've worked with the top 50 companies, you've worked all over. Give me an example of like the worst case scenario you've ever come across.
Can I give you two?
Please.
I'll make them short.
No, as long as you like.
One was an organization that unfortunately had a class action lawsuit. It was a race-based class action suit that they lost. There was a huge purse attached to that for the organization. And part of the settlement was the organization had to earmark a lot of money to do, I'm going to do my air quotes here, diversity and inclusion training. So you can imagine me walking into a room of folks in a great organization saying, hey, we're going to have this class today because you lost this lawsuit. Yay, can't wait. Let's talk about it. But I have to say, there was some of the most amazing dialogue that took place there. There was some of the most amazing learning that took place there. And I really do believe it started to change the organization. So that's one example. Okay. The second example was an organization who decided they thought it was a good thing to do. And the first time I went into the session, this was it was an evening session. The session started at 11 p.m. By the way, I'm too old to do night classes anymore. Just so I put that out there. Anyway, I show up, I get there early, I set up, it was great. The people came in and people just sat there. They didn't even talk to each other. I thought, note to self, this is odd. So I started the session. Hey, good evening, welcome. So glad you're here. It was actually a session focused on empowerment, team empowerment. Nice. We talk about empowerment, la, la, la. I got the body language again, the hands crossed. So as a good facilitator would, I thought, let me get them talking. So I just stopped and said, hey, take the next 3 minutes at your table groups, talk about the one thing you want to get out of the session today. Nobody talked. I walked up to one table and joked, said, hey, it's a team activity. That means all of you. Right. A guy looked me square in the face and said, F you, you're not my boss. I don't have to do anything you say.
Wow.
That's what I said. And I thought, So I went to another group, got a similar response. So I walked into the center of the room, pulled a chair there, dropped the participant guide on the floor. So it made a loud splat noise and said, I don't know what's going on here, but I can't get to this until we deal with what's happening here. Right. So I don't know what's happening. Talk to me. Somebody talk to me. And there was about 3 or 4 minutes of uncomfortable silence. And finally, somebody said that they saw me as an extension of management. They don't respect management. Why would they respect me?
Wow.
And I said, all right, well, here's what I can offer. We all have control over what happens in here over the next few hours. And I went up to an easel and I grabbed a marker and said, so let's start naming specific behaviors. What would respect look like to you in here today? Nice. And I'm going to go first. You don't get to say F you to the facilitator. Oh. Okay, next. And we had pages and they started talking and that took about an hour. But once they got it out, we could take a breath. And so I tell that whole story to come back to that organization had a huge problem they didn't know they had. Yeah. And that was, we needed to focus on that rather than let's talk about how we build empowerment. And we got there and it ended up being a beautiful experience. But that was my first day there.
Can I ask you, where was management during all of that? Why weren't they there to begin with?
Well, now there's a question. They did have a video to kick off. The senior leader had a video, a little 3-minute video. And just to give you an idea of how sometimes we can have a blind spot, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. He's, welcome. Thank you all for coming. And what you people need to do and what you people, and the term you people oftentimes does not land well for folks, regardless of who you are.
And whoever's on the receiving end of that phrase is immediately feeling like you're being othered. It's just that simple.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So. This is going to lead me to our next, beautifully right into the next part that I want to ask you about. Best practices. What do you recommend to these people to drag them kicking and screaming into the 21st century?
I want to bring them respectfully in. That's my intention, right?
Okay.
That's my intention. I'm not a confrontational speaker. I'm not a confrontational trainer.
Good.
I really do try to see the environment away with my woke story that I shared with you, right? I want folks, and I know when I stand up and get to a microphone, there are probably about 30%, at least 30% of the people in that room who don't want to hear what I have to say. They were forced to be there. So I know that up front. So for me, I see that as a personal challenge. And it's like, you know what? I hope by the time you leave today, I at least give you something new to think about. I'm not trying to tell anybody what to do. I'm not trying to change anybody's personal beliefs, but I do hope I plant a seed so that maybe you think about something a little bit differently after you leave our time together. So when we think about best practices, it kind of depends where the person's coming from. But one thing is, can you show up as a leader in particular? Can you show up and individualize your team? Yeah, right. So if we're looking at team bonding, how do I know how to make my team bond more effectively? Is I really kind of need to ask them.
Yeah.
I have really, it's a book now, but it's something that I've crowdsourced over the last 7 or 8 years. I've taken best practices that organizations have been using and collected them. So for example, when people say things like, I really want to include and increase more diversity. Now it's tricky there because then people say, I need a diverse hire. And I don't, any human being you're going to hire is going to be a diverse hire, right?
Yes.
But it's a different workshop. But, I want to bring more diversity into the organization. One of the examples I have listed in my crowdsourced book is there's an organization I was working with. It was a technology company. And they have, if you want to be promoted inside the organization, you have to self-nominate. Well, they knew they wanted more women to self-nominate. So there was a senior director. He sent an email out one year. He said, hey, don't forget to self-nominate. And, oh, by the way, women in the organization, don't forget, we want to hear from you. That's all he said, basically.
Right. Okay.
That year, the number of women that put in for a promotion went up by 30 some odd %. And he thought, So the next year, he tested it to see if it was a fluke. Same email, same result. Third year, he just happened to forget to send the email. The number dropped to only about 8%.
Wow, that tells you it's one sentence. One sentence in an email. Wow.
Yeah. So the idea of intentionality in this space is so important. Susan Scott, in her book, Fierce Conversations, talks about asking employees just informally. So what's the single most important thing I need to know about you to be a better leader for you? Okay. And then zipping the lip and letting them respond. Right. So now you might get this response. I don't know.
Right.
You could come back with, well, if you did know, what would it be?
Right. Right.
So really kind of just getting to know people individually is so important. Pausing before that thought that you have in your head shows up on paper. If you're going to make a hiring decision, maybe I have 2 or 3 candidates. I'm not really sure. I'm kind of going back and forth. Ask yourself this question. Would I think the same thing about this candidate if they were, and I call it flip it, if they were the opposite of what they are? So if you were interviewing for a job, would I think the same thing about Rich if Rich were a woman, if Rich were a man of color, if Rich were, right? And that might give you an aha around any personal biases you might have. So there are a lot of tips and tricks along the way to help.
How many times do you have to explain to leadership why this is so important? And because barring the ones who have put their foot in it and now need to start paying monies to somebody, how can you explain to someone who might be listening to this podcast right now why this is needed now more than ever?
Because intentionally talking about this, having leaders who are intentional about leading inclusively, there's tons of research out there. There's tons of data that actually supports the hypothesis that many had for decades, which was if you have diversity, it will yield better results, right? Because I have more perspectives, I have different ideas. That's great. But that was a hypothesis. So Dr. Scott Page out of the University of Michigan has done a lot of work. He's got all the algorithms. And remember, I don't do numbers, so I can't give you those. That's true. We know that's true, but with one caveat. And that caveat is it's difference that's well led, which means I have to have an inclusive culture and I've got to have a leader who's leading inclusively. Okay. So when we look at really creating those spaces, when leaders come and say, yeah, how do I do this? How do I get better at this?
Right.
It's really about just being present in the moment. What do you need? What does your team need? How do I make those connecting points? Because the better they are, the better they're going to be at doing what they need to do, which is going to ultimately, again, it goes back to your vision, mission, and values. I want to serve my clients or customers. I want to serve the communities that we're in.
And it's always important to try to remember this for anybody out there, that melting pot idea, that idea of everybody comes with their own experiences. They come with their own cultural identities. They come with a cultural identity that someone out there who needs your product will be, greater listening to, greater connecting to.
Yeah. I had someone just the other day tell me a story about the first Apple computer that had a monitor and a keyboard.
Yep.
And they said the team that built that was a mostly young in age team. When it went to market, it excluded one group of buyers. Guess which demographic it excluded? It excluded anyone who wore bifocals, because since the monitor didn't move, so there was a glare. If you wore bifocals, you couldn't use it. So I don't know about you, but if I'm Apple, I want money from all
everybody. Yeah.
Let's retool it.
So how do we keep this fresh every day? After the event is done, after the leadership training has been accomplished, after the poor people forced to be there at 11 p.m. get to go home, how are we certain this gets to continue on in practice?
Again, one of the best practices, I didn't make this up, I'm completely stealing it. It's in my crowdsourced book. One of the best practices I've seen that has worked so beautifully, I worked with a large Fortune 50 company, and their CEO at the time was such a big believer in this and thought this was so important to their business model. At the end of everything he did, he would say, okay, is there any diversity, inclusion, something we missed in our last 5 minutes? What did we miss? Let's talk about it. Nice. And so what happened was it happened every time. So when I got folks in a session or a lunch and learn or some speech I was giving somewhere, they would joke about it and say, oh, well, he's talking about it all the time now. I said, it's awesome because now you're talking about it all the time. Yeah. And if at the end of every meeting, what if you did that and you asked your team, hey, is there any diversity or inclusion implication going on here that we missed? And just give folks 5 minutes to think about it. Like I said with the Chevy Nova, I don't have to have somebody who's Hispanic or Latino on that team, but I might want to have somebody who speaks a language or knows a little bit about the culture on my team. Kind of thinking ahead with that.
For those people out there who are different than everybody else, because everybody is, which means I'm talking to all of you out there, how can we make sure that they feel like, first off, if they're not noticing enough DEI&B going on in their corporation, that they can step up and talk about it safely? And how do we make sure that the company actually encourages them to do so?
I would say the biggest supporter for any organization in any industry in any country of making this work successfully and safely. I really appreciate you use the term safely, because today when we hear so much more about psychological safety and how people either feel it or they don't, is having a lead. This has to be leader led. And in doing that, you can't say HR is going to take care of this or so-and-so is going to take care of this. Right. It's really, for it to work, it's got to be leader led. And that means creating places and talking about what those places are, letting your employees know, whether it's, I can reach out to HR. Some groups have an inclusion council or a people council or a respect council or an employee resource group, but find those places inside your organizations so that you can go. Now, can we promise the psychological safety or safety in that? I personally can't promise that. And that's why culture inside an organization is so important to talk about, because hopefully people are feeling, and you find out through your engagement surveys and pulse surveys, things like that. But find out how your folks are experiencing your organization. Because, if you look at the Gallup survey data, they let us know who's engaged, disengaged, and actively disengaged, and the numbers aren't great. Even they've changed a little bit over the last 10 years, but roughly in the United States, we're only about, if you look at all the numbers, we're about 50% disengaged, 20% actively disengaged, which leaves only 30% engaged employees left to carry the load for everybody else.
Oh.
So, again, the numbers change a little bit year after year, but it's kind of the same thing, which is really, if I were running that business and I'm getting 30% of my folks to pull the load for the whole organization, that's a lot.
What does actively disengaged look like?
Those are those folks who are out there. They show up every day and like, how can I stick it to my manager today? Or how can I tank this project today? Or how can I get under the skin of my colleague today? They're a fan of XYZ football team and I'm the opposite football team and I'm going to rub in their face every chance I get.
Okay. Yikes. I got to say, recently I was having a discussion with some fellow facilitators for team bonding, and we were talking about our favorite icebreaker challenges, those things that we do to warm people up before the big thing happens. And I was talking about a game that I play called Categories, wherein I give people, the entirety of the group, a set amount of time to find everybody in the group who matches them in a given category. It is amazing to me when you first watch how the minute I say, everybody come on over here, away from the desks, away from the tables and chairs, to this big open space, and you watch everyone pair off into their groups. Mm-hmm. They immediately parcel themselves apart from one another. Then you start playing the game, and you start to realize, first off, this group over here never knew anything about this group over here. Never even bothered to find out. Until you find out they all use the same brand of toothpaste this morning. Or they all have the same favorite pet. Or, anything of that nature, that just showing them that there are more similarities than differences, it helps me to just ease everybody into the next thing that we're going to take care of.
Yeah. I love when my sessions are very high energy. They're very interactive. And
From you, I can't imagine that, Mel.
Yeah. I love setting up similar activities where you give folks a chance to, it's not me telling you,
right,
you have similarities. It's you, like in your activity, you uncover that. And people are like, wow, I completely have something so much in common with this person who looks nothing like me.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly right. Exactly right. Let's, because we're getting to that. I'm getting the high sign from my producer that we're getting short. So let's leave everybody on a positive note. As I was saying, we both said just a few decades ago, this was not even a question up for debate. It wasn't until the government stepped in and said, we have to make this an area that all businesses must focus on, to where we are now, where even just corporate culture itself is a thing that is now in the zeitgeist. It's in everyday conversation.
Yep.
What do we think we're going to look for? We're going to look forward to next in DEI&B.
I think we're looking, and we've seen this. It's just this year we've seen, for example, names change. The Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion is now the People's Office.
Nice.
Or yes, there was I don't remember which one, but there was a university in Florida who invited students in, and they gave them a quiz before they went into this meeting, and they said, how important do you think diversity, equity, and inclusion is? And it was very low number. They went in, they talked about it, they found out there were a lot of more similarities than they thought, and they talked about again, what does this really mean, and removed the negativity. When they left, they gave them the same quiz, and when they left, like 80-something% of the people said, this is actually really important and we need to do more of it. So as you look at how we go forward, I'm very hopeful. Human beings are human beings. Mm-hmm. People are, the majority of folks are, they're smart. They connect, they see things. Sometimes they just need a little bit of a broader perspective or a new way to look at something. And I hope that's something I can bring them.
Fantastic. Speaking of which, Mel, before we move on to fun and goofiness, how can people find you to either find out more about all of this or to get your help in bringing their people into the DEI&B world?
MelanieMillerAtlanta.com. MelanieMillerAtlanta.com.
You were talking about your book that you've created for yourselves. Any possibility of publishing that for everyone else?
Since it's crowdsourced, I'm gonna get it's not all my stuff. Obviously, probably won't actually published that. I usually use that with my clients, and I share that with them when we work on certain projects. So there's a section that's specific, for example, to hiring and recruiting. There's a section that's specific to succession planning. So it's got lots of different tenets to it. But I will say, I am working on a book where I think the title is going to be "Diversity Doesn't Work When." And nice. Each chapter, it's not going to be a huge book, but each chapter will be a story and an experience that I've had where I've seen this isn't working, but here's why. So hopefully just through some storytelling, it might be a good read. So we'll see. I'll let you know.
I'd love to hear it because I'd love to read it. And we look forward to helping you promote it when it does come out. What's that address? What was that email address again?
MelanieMillerAtlanta.com.
MelanieMillerAtlanta.com. My team out there, give it up for Melanie Miller, everybody. Mel, I had a great time with you. I hope you continue to have a great time with me. Yes?
Yes, indeed, sir.
Fantastic, because hold on. It's time for my speed round. All right, my friend. As we discussed before we even came on the podcast, all this is 60 seconds. I'm going to play some music that keeps me in mind where the time is, and we're going to ask you a series of completely innocuous questions. It's just a chance for us to get to know you a little bit better. I don't know how competitive you are, but we have 14 as the number to beat. 14 questions in 60 seconds. Okay?
Oh, all right.
Let's see if we can do this together.
Face.
All right.
Got to get my game face on. All right.
All right, then. As soon as you hear the music, I'm going to start asking questions. Let's do this. What's your name?
Melanie Miller.
Do you have any kids?
No.
Do you have any pets?
I used to.
Okay. What is your favorite hobby?
Swimming.
Okay. Who would you like to see play you in the movie of your life?
Ooh, Isabella Rossellini.
If you lived in a different state, which would be the one you'd choose?
Illinois. I love Chicago.
Nice. Do you have a nickname?
Mel.
If you could have any nickname you want, what would it be?
Mel.
Okay. Who's the funniest person you know?
Oh, that's such a great question because there's so many funny people I know. I'm going to go with H. Walker.
Okay. What's something you remember from kindergarten?
That I used to wear big bows in my hair.
Would you call yourself a leader or a follower?
Leader most of the time. Sometimes I can be a follower.
Name something you regret.
It was that perm in the 8th grade.
I'm not even going to ask you to dig deeper. If we had time, I might have, but I'm not going to. Melanie Miller, 15. You did it! You have set the new record for season 5. We're at 15. Oh, this was great, Mel. Thank you so much for coming on. And thank you, of course, not only for the work you do, but for talking to us about such a vital topic.
Thank you for having me, Rich. To you and your listeners, thank you for listening. I appreciate it. I think I told you earlier, I love what I do. So thanks for just creating a space to have some more fun.
Thank you for having fun with me. And thank you, my team out there. That's it. We're wrapping up yet another episode of Team Building Saves the World. If you've enjoyed this episode, whether you're new to the podcast or an old fan of the show, please share it with everyone that you know. Whether they're a coworker, a friend, or family member, it just helps us to share the vital information you heard on today's episode. You can find out all about us, including all past episodes, at teambonding.com/podcast. You can also find us wherever you find your favorite podcast. Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you go, my friends, we are going to be there. And please don't forget to look for us on all the social medias at Team Bond Podcast. Leave me a message. Tell me what you liked about this show. Tell me what you didn't like about this show. If you have an idea for a future topic, I do want to hear from you. So, before we say our final farewells for this episode of Team Building Saves the World, please never forget, my team, if you are within the sound of my voice, you are on my team now, and I am forever going to be on yours. So long, team. I'll see you next time.
It's been said that you learn more about a person in an hour of play than in a year of conversation. So why not put your coworkers to play with the help of the team at Team Bonding? Team Bonding was founded over 20 years ago with one simple question. How can employees have a great time while fostering strong, authentic bonds between people who work together? Their catalog of innovative events includes scavenger hunts, Jeopardy, and much more. Each activity, whether live, virtual, or hybrid, maximizes the impact of team building with an accent on fun. Visit teambonding.com to schedule your event now. Team Bonding, when you want seriously fun results.